Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Complicated Creation. This will be Part 17, Chapter 12, entitled Terrible Legacy. Hisashi watches as Shoda storms out of the room. There's a pause as everyone takes stock. Deku looks carefully blank. Chatora's upset, but keeping a stiff upper lip. Nezu is unreadable as always. Kayama's rubbing at her temple, lips pursed, and Yagi looks like he's considering going after Shoda, and that is going to go over like a house on fire. Hisashi pushes himself up. "I'll go after him," he tells the room, still echoing from Shoda's outburst. "You lot had better come up with a foolproof way to keep Deku safe, because if he gets hurt in the process of all of this," he waves a hand in a vague circle of this, "I don't think Shoda's going to forgive you." "I'll be okay," Deku insists as Hisashi heads for the door. "Tell him I'm sorry, but I'm going to do this." Hisashi hesitates and looks over his shoulder at the kid and, well, fuck. Deku's got that look he's seen before. Not on this kid, but on others. On Shinso, on Aizawa. Hisashi is not the feelings guy out of their group, but he crouches down in front of Deku and prods him on the arm gently, until Deku looks at him. "Shoda's upset, but it isn't your fault," he says, hating the audience but refusing to let Deku just stand there and think Shoda might throw him away for one disagreement. "He lost his cool, but he'll come around. He's worried about keeping you safe. And about people taking advantage of you, he thinks, but doesn't say out loud, because unlike some people might suggest, he does, in fact, have tact. I'll talk to him, but don't think he's giving up on you yet. He's both way too much of a stubborn asshole and someone who cares too much to do that. And if you tell him I said that, I will deny it and call you a bald-faced liar. Got it?" He winks, and behind him Yagi snorts a quiet laugh. "Okay." Deku smiles. It's a little lopsided, and it doesn't meet his eyes, but it's something better than the blank expression he had moments before. "Good. Now you make plans on whatever you have to do to be safe, and Shoda will talk to you again tomorrow. Hisashi needs to take his husband home, really, but that's not going to happen. A quiet night in 1A's dorms is the best he can manage right now." Deku nods, and Hisashi takes that as the best he'll get, as he turns and heads out to find Shoda, preferably before he breaks something. He has to at least be glad that Shoda can't go out on patrol right now, and angry Eraserhead tended to bring back villains in more pieces than they started with. He checks Shoda's usual haunts, including his classroom, the supply closet he likes to nap in, the small training gym that was usually used for independent study and staff purposes. All to no avail. He's heading towards the dorms when he sees Shoda coming out from behind them, hands in his pockets and head tucked down into his scarf, shoulders hunched, his whole form just radiating anger and frustration. He sees Hisashi and sighs loud enough to be heard in the quiet of the night, and Hisashi jogs forward before Shoda tries to take off on him. "You're taking this harder than I think anyone expected," Hisashi offers once he's close enough not to need to shout. "Oh, really?" is Shoda's response, and the tone itself carries layers of derision. "What was your first indication?" "Come on, Shoda. Don't be like that." Hisashi nudges him, trying to get him to lighten up. "They're not bringing the kid into Tartarus. They want to do it at the hospital. He'll have heroes there. You can be there. He says he'll be fine." "Fine. Like he was fine living on the streets, or like when he was living in a flop house. Or fine like when he gave up a childhood memory to get me home in one piece." Hisashi knows Shoda's angry, but this level of vitriol is surprising even for him. "Because I've known this kid for 2 weeks, and fine is not something I trust him to make a goddamn judgment call on." Hisashi has to lean back because Shoda's so upset that his hair is starting to lift. "That's what we're going to be there for, then, to look after him." "That's just it," Shoda snaps. Hisashi's seen him this angry on very few occasions, and it hasn't been directed at him in a very long time. "None of you actually believe him, or me, do you?" "What?" "The spirits," Shoda scowls. "You don't believe they're real, independent creatures that can fuck that kid up." "I never said that." Hisashi holds his hands up, placating. "I believe you went through something that none of us can really get, and I mean, I don't know about spirits, but it's obvious it has something to do with quirks, right? Like you said, personification. but if All For One could cause trouble for us outside of Tartarus, he'd be doing it, wouldn't he? You can't really think he'd cause problems for Deku under all of our noses." Izashi wants to believe Shoda. Of course he does. But magic is still a little hard to wrap his head around. A weird quirk makes way more sense, and Harage had confirmed that Shoda's memories hadn't really been played with. But some quirks could still create things that were real when you experienced them. No one thinks Deku's a villain at this point, but having his quirk properly tested with, machines and things, that'd be good, right? "Hitoshi's quirk found us in Miyazaki. If he can do that, there's no reason All For One's quirk couldn't do the same. I watched Eri's quirk give Deku a concussion and pinned him to the floor." Shoda runs a hand through his hair to pull it away from his eyes, which are more bloodshot than usual. "Do you really think we can fight something invisible, intangible, that can only harm Deku? Because I don't think we can." "You think his spirit could do that? Why wouldn't he try now, then?" "I don't know." Shoda rocks back on his heels. "I don't know. Maybe he doesn't know about Deku. Maybe he's avoiding Deku because the kid's got some serious power, and whatever his spirit is doesn't want to mess with him. Maybe he's waiting for a chance to do something when our backs are turned. I don't know, and I can't protect this kid from an invisible enemy, and I can barely protect this kid from himself. He literally just finished helping Eri. He helped Mirio. Chio says he hasn't gained weight yet, and he should have. We should be protecting him, not throwing him at a problem the minute we think he can solve it for us." Shoda's chest is heaving, and Hisashi realizes he's misjudged this. He thought Shoda was just upset about no one listening to him about Deku because he was having parental feelings even if he doesn't have much legal say yet. He thought Shoda was upset at them going over his head. Shoda's not pissed at them for undermining him. Shoda's afraid. Hisashi steps in close and takes Shoda's hands, about the most he can do out in the open like this. Shoda only shuts down when he tries to be demonstrative in public. He squeezes them, and it makes things a tiny bit better when Shoda doesn't yank away from his grasp. "I'm sorry," he says, because first and foremost, he fucked up here, and Shoda's wired to listen when someone says they're sorry, as fucked up as that can be sometimes. "I'm sorry I don't entirely believe you yet. I want to, and I'm trying, but it's hard. But he can try harder. He can damn well try harder." "I don't think Totoro would have asked on a whim, Shoda. I get the feeling that Tomoko's in bad shape if he came here to ask when Deku's barely gotten settled, right? And if we're going to protect him, maybe the best way to start is to get him under the eye of some experts so they can see what happens around him. The first way to defend him is to understand what's going on. If it's magic, Hisashi has to stretch his memory as far as it'll go. Then we cover him in those wards he has, or sew salt packets into all of his clothes, or have a dozen priests come and purify the school and our apartment and his uniforms. Whatever it takes, Hisashi promises." Shoda glares at him through his bangs, but it's a much more familiar sort of glare, tired instead of angry. It means he's listening. Good. "If you really think he's going to be in danger like this, we should find out everything we can now so we can work on looking after him. Otherwise, maybe you're right and something will come after him when we're not prepared." He takes a risk and smiles just a little. "Don't you always teach your students that proper intel is the first step to any mission, Mr. I work in the dead of the night, who the fuck supplied these blueprints?" It drags a huff from Shoda, which might as well be a full-bellied laugh, the state he's in. Hisashi curls his fingers, and Shoda returns the gesture, breathing, evening out as he sighs. "You might have a point." "Oh ho! Might have a point. That's pretty close to saying I'm right, you know." "Don't get too cocky." Shoda's grip gets tighter for just a moment, and then he lets go. "I still don't like this." "I know." Hisashi nods and nudges Shoda towards the dorms. "I promised him you'd check in tomorrow, and promised him you weren't angry at him. Told the others they'd need to come up with a plan to keep him safe. Tomorrow we can tear it apart and see what else we can add to it besides," Hisashi adds as they stop at the stairs leading to the dorm's front doors. "I've only known him for 2 weeks, and I get the feeling he wouldn't have said no to Chitara no matter what we decided. Kid's basically a hero in training already." Shoda sighs and shakes his head and surprises Hisashi by leaning in just a little, pressing their shoulders together. "That's the problem," he admits, talking to the door more than to Hisashi. "He's not in training yet." Preparing to face his possible future is actually pretty anticlimactic. They aren't taking him to Tartarus, not even near it. He's heading back to the hero hospital where Eri was kept, and everyone seems to think that he probably won't be able to fix Ragdoll's quirk exactly, but he might be able to either tell them more about what happened to it, or give them research to further study it and study all for one. He isn't even going to meet the man himself, just maybe, possibly, his spirit. Aizawa isn't happy about it, obviously, and Tamomo no Mae hasn't shown up at all since Aizawa stormed out the night before, even though Izuku's called for her. He doesn't know what to think about that, except that maybe she thinks, well, maybe she knows what he's going to find out and is afraid for him. Or afraid of him. She probably doesn't want to be around for it either way. Aizawa, at least, doesn't avoid him. Instead, he takes Izuku to get supplies. If he's going to do this, he wants to do it right. And if All for One Spirit does try to come after him, he tells Aizawa he can prepare for it a lot easier if the adults will let him, and not think he's crazy. Aizawa at least stops looking so angry when Izuku explains what that entails, and walks with him to the nearest shrine where they buy a dozen new gofu. Chatora's spirit says he'll guard me, he tells Aizawa on their way back. And that he'll bring the other spirits from the Wild Wild Pussycats in case anything does try to be aggressive. And I was going to use Sun Eater's quirk to make myself armor, just to be extra sure. Aizawa looks at him with tired, red-rimmed eyes. Izuku's pretty sure he didn't sleep much last night, and it's entirely his fault. What? Well, I traded helping Sun Eater for using his quirk. I get to call on it 3 times, so I was thinking I can eat some clams in advance, and that way if I need to, I can make body armor. He'd studied videos of Sun Eater in the sports festival late last night just to be sure that that would work, and it seemed reasonable. Sun Eater used it only for parts of his body like a shield, but Izuku was pretty sure he could make a keratin shell for his important bits. Aizawa was still looking at him while they walk. He seems about to say something, then stops and presses his lips together in a frown, then shakes his head. Just how easy is it for you to use these favors, exactly? It's pretty straightforward, as long as I know what to expect. The spirit channel's with me, so I can't... Izuku gestures with a hand. Just do it now. I have to call on them, and they have to appear, and then I ask, and then they have to agree and actually lend me the power. They could ignore me or refuse, but that would go against the contract, and that's a really big deal for spirits. He thinks about Tamomo no Mae and how easy that had been, how she hadn't even been touching him at the time. I usually try to be careful about what I use, since some favors are one-time only, though I usually try to ask for a few. Just what sort of spirits owe you exactly? Aizawa asks, and Izuku still can't quite tell if he's annoyed at his answer or just tired. The question makes him pause, though, because... Is it okay if I don't say? He asks in turn, a little unsure. It feels rude. It's their secrets, their debts, and a lot of them aren't happy to owe me at all. I only mentioned Oku because he knows I'll be calling on him later. Aizawa frowns a little more, but he shrugs and doesn't get upset, which Izuku can be glad for. It's fine, he says in a voice that implies it isn't fine, and they'll be talking about it later, but Izuku can, well, deal with it later. At least you're taking this seriously. Of course I am. Izuku doesn't understand the statement. You think the others aren't? I think that if your precautions fail us, we're going to be in trouble, Aizawa tells him point blank. I'm worried about what happens if something with a grudge comes after you here. At least I could fight them in the other place. I'll fight them off, Izuku promises, touched by how worried Aizawa is. You saw before. I know how to look after myself. Ares' spirit gave you a concussion and nearly cracked your ribs, he points out, voice flat. Well, yes, but I could have stopped him if it got worse, and I was trying to convince him to stop before I had to. And he really had been on the cusp of having to fight back before Tamomo no Mae had arrived. Aizawa stops and puts a hand on his shoulder and turns him so that they're face to face. Why didn't you, Deku? If you could stop him before he hurt you, why do you let them hurt you? Izuku looks up at Aizawa, Eraserhead, the hero, and thinks of all the lies he could tell, the ones he would have told 2 weeks ago. He swallows them down. Because it always makes things worse, in the end, he admits as Aizawa's grip on his shoulder tightens. Because it proves them right. No, Aizawa says, short and sharp and fierce. Protecting yourself against others doesn't prove them right, even if you have to take their names to do it. That's like suggesting All Might is a violent and dangerous man because he's constantly punching villains. Izuku doesn't know about that. You could argue that All Might was dangerous, depending on how you frame things. You could suggest he was dangerous to civilians, unlike some other pro-heroes, but Aizawa makes an exasperated sound and glares through his bangs. Are you trying to come up with ways to declare All Might dangerous? No, Izuku lies badly. Just this once, kid. I want you to promise me. If something comes after you today, you will fight back. Don't let them walk all over you. Don't let them hurt you. Fight back to protect yourself. And become a monster, Izuku thinks, as Aizawa's grip gets almost painful before he lets go. I'll try, he says, because he thinks if he lies outright, Aizawa will be able to tell, and will try to stop him, and he wants to do this. He needs to do this. Aizawa doesn't look convinced, though, so he takes a breath and straightens his back. I don't want to get hurt, he says, more firmly. That's the truth, after all. I'll protect myself. Also true. It's defending himself he has trouble with. Good. Aizawa seems to sag a little in relief. Just good. Let's get back and see if everyone else has done their part. In the space between the human world and the realm of the spirits, there is nothing. It is a special sort of nothing. It is time and space compressed, the place where spirits go to move from one point of Earth to another without boundaries. It is a space that exists in the margins, quite literally, and as a result, many travel through it without understanding it, without even knowing what they are accessing as they do. Only the oldest know what the space truly is, and only the wisest can access it directly, to use it as more than a thoroughfare. Mitsuchi sits, and because he wills it, there is something to sit on in this nothingness. He has his human form here because it is polite to keep himself to scale with his companions, and he prefers this to simply shrinking his true form down. Lady Kaiyo, dressed in silks, paces back and forth in a froth of motion, unbound by the theoretical weight of her layers, hair rippling around her shoulders and down her back. You knew he did not understand, Mitsuchi asks, though it is more of a statement, an attempt to understand. You have been with him. Why did you not explain? Explain what? She turns, and everything about her ripples, even if there is no breeze. That he is being judged not on his own actions, but on the actions of a man nearly 2 centuries his senior. That the reason our kind thinks of him as a monster is entirely out of his control, that his existence points to a greater duty than simply digging sylphs out of old wards. She is angry, and she is beautiful in her anger. He has admired her ferocity ever since she first fell into his domain. He is, however, unfazed by her fury. You could explain that he is capable of making monsters, and that is why we find him monstrous. That the legacy before him is one that haunts many of us. He has seen what became of Madanbashi. Years ago, Mitsuchi had known the Shisa spirit when it had been solely itself, a great lion and protector of Naha Bay, long before it had become the terrible fusion of souls it now was. How long until he makes another like him, or worse? He still mourns for his brother, and will never be able to forgive the humans for what horror had been done to him. Even if Deku seems to mean well, and truly he does, it cannot last. Humans are fickle, after all. They change, too much, with the seasons. Deku will be their ally only until it suits him to be otherwise, and the damage he will do then is immense. I notice you didn't tell him anything. Lady Kaiyo ceases in her movements to glare at him directly. He is a child, Mitsuchi. I am aware, and truly he is aware of this. The child seems more than simply good and kind. He is thoughtful and intelligent. But human children do not remain as they are. They become men. Not all men are evil. Not all men can control us at their whim. The human they call All for One was a child once. He was kind once, I remember, even if you do not. He watches Lady Kaiyo frown at him, but The expression is brief across her delicate features, morphing into something like pity. He does not want her pity. He wants her to be safe. I lost Ryujin. We have both lost too many to the monster the world gave us blindly. Please, he pleads, hands flat on his knees. For our friendship, if nothing else, do not give this boy the chance to claim you for himself. And that is how you will repay him. She steps back, and he realizes she is disappointed in him by the set of her brow and the curl of her lip. After what he has done for you, you will pay him in suspicion and nothing else. She is right. There is still honor to be considered. I will find a way to make good for what he has done, he tells her with a slight bow of acceptance. But I will not place myself in the path of becoming his slave. She sighs, and perhaps he is put out by her disappointment at the implication of his failure despite his reasons. Perhaps he has lost her faith. Perhaps he is petty when he meets her gaze and holds it. Have you at least told him the truth, then, about your part in all of this? My part is often grossly exaggerated, she snaps, angry all over again. Because if it had more meaning, I would be owed more than a reminder of my part. Her silks swirl as she steps away, moving to leave, slicing the reality around them thin enough to pass through. Mizuchi regrets his words. Please, don't go. He stands and offers a hand. Stay, at least for a while. We still have much to speak on. Deku is going to try to restore what All for One has taken, she tells him, and watches as he finds himself shocked into place. I don't know if he can. I don't know what harm will fall to him in the attempt. But I do know I will not stand idly by and leave him to fate, not when he has refused to do so for so many of us in turn. She turns her back on him, and he feels very suddenly too old and too young at once despite his true age. She does not wait for his rebuttal. She slices through time and disappears from their space between, and leaves him alone with his thoughts. They do not make good company. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 12. The second half will be up next. Let me know your all's thoughts and reactions to this chapter. Hope you all are still enjoying, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.